that one. The other items are under action or completed.
Thank you. Any petitions?
Just looking at the upcoming agenda items.
Can I make a request on these, please? Can we change the pink to something a little bit lighter?
Easier to read.
Yeah, easier to read, please. It's pretty difficult to read for us blind old people. So what's the first comment that I can't see? I can't read.
So there are a couple of long outstanding ones which we'll follow up. There's one of those reports in the agenda today regarding the administrative costs that we talked to, and we've got the bi-monthly cycle of the workforce and safety alternating in those reports to council now.
Okay, so that needs to be updated because
Yeah, mostly on top of those issues.
Okay.
There are no petitions.
No petitions.
There are no other notes or recommendations to come forward.
Any material personal interest, conflict of interest, or personal gifts and benefits? No. So we move right along to commercial services. If Fran and Carl would like to come down, please.
Chair,
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll just initially kick this off. So this is a report in regards to, there's a review of the process in which we undertake policy development within the organisation has been undertaken, looking to streamline and simplify that process. And Cal Bendel certainly has been involved in assisting council with that work. So I'll hand over to Cal to present as such his report the improvement that's been proposed to council.
Thanks, Michelle. Madam Chair, good afternoon, everyone. I think most of you probably know Fran Roth from Michelle's office, who's certainly been doing a good deal of legwork on the policy register for some time now. It would be fair to say that this item of business is a housekeeping matter. You currently have a council document development framework, which might otherwise be referred to as the policy-making policy, which sort of governs or provides the framework for which we manage the policy register and the process by which council determines policy and the organisation determines procedures. It was looked at a couple of years ago. It's currently in nominates 4 different types of policy elements, being policies that are adopted by the council, policies that are adopted by the executive, procedures and guidelines. We're proposing a bit of a simplification to that process to reduce back to 2 categories only, so that is all policy is determined by the council, not making that distinction between council policy and administrative policy, and then the procedures that support policies are determined by the organisation. So that's one change that's proposed in the framework that's presented to you. The other is the current practice is for policies to be reviewed every 2 years, and it would be fair to say there's a reasonable backlog in getting those policies back in front of the council in that 2-yearly time frame, and particularly if all policies are now to be determined by the council. What is being proposed is that by default they're only considered once each council term, so each 4 years. But obviously if there is anything that triggers the need for a review, policy can be reviewed at any time, and if there is a trigger by a change to the law or circumstance or a change in local conditions, then policy will be brought back for consideration at that time. But the default provisions will be just once a council term rather than each 2 years, which we've been struggling to achieve in recent times. So those 2 changes are fundamentally what's presented to you today, and recommend that for adoption And if that is done, then we will actually bring a swathe of policies to you in the next few weeks to kick that process off.
Makes sense.
Through the chair, I guess, Carl, would there be sort of, I guess, in some sort of classification of your policies, would there be something that be, sort of more likely to be influenced or changed or likely to be influenced during the term rather than?
I guess there's an array of policy, Madam Chair, there's an array of policies, as you know, and we had reason yesterday to be talking loosely around a trigger for a change. So there certainly will be all sorts of triggers that come up to present policy to council outside of that default period. But I think if we get into the practice that the council any incoming council puts its stamp on its policy suite at the commencement of the term and then sort of sees those out before the term, unless circumstances change that trigger a review. Otherwise, I think that's reasonable practice.
That's fair.
Certainly there should be, if something gets triggered as a review within the 4-year term, that doesn't mean that you're just going to stop doing everything until the end of the 4 years, does it?
That's right.
So,
Through you, Madam Chair, just to respond to that, Mr. Mayor, one of the policies that's regularly revisited is around particularly the election signings. So every time a level of government chooses to have an election that becomes a topical issue, we go back and revisit the policy at that point in time. I think that's the cleanest example. That will be the trigger for us to revisit those. And if there are changes in the other guidance, in that instance, we receive guidance from Transport and Main Roads in relation to their views on particular things as those policy changes through, particularly the state government, and that will influence our policy direction in some instances as well.
is there any other questions, comments? Very straightforward, Jason. So there is a resolution there, recommendation that the framework policy be adopted, noting 2 fundamental changes. Somebody move that be Councillor Drimblecombe, seconded please. Councillor Bell, all those in favour? Thank you. Thank you very much. Didn't have to say anything. Moving right along, corporate services. That's fine.
I'll
You'll do it?
listen to that, Madam Chair. Councillors, there had been a list in the report for some period of time regarding how we as an organisation ranks in terms of what we call the administration costs that are attributed to council. And I suppose these are the costs that relate to running the organisation as a level of government and the controls that we need in place. I've certainly taken advantage of Wayne's experience in this area and pulling this report together. You can see there in the executive summary we talk about our gross overhead at 17.4%. The benchmarking that's been done certainly suggests that there is a target range of 10 to 15% across, particularly the work done through New South Wales local government. But there's probably a more acceptable benchmarking limit that talks about up to 20%. Notice Wayne's joined us, and Madam Chair, I'll continue to talk to the report. One of the things that we do include inside those corporate overheads that may not be in others certainly is around the work we do on asset management. You can see that that's been discounted somewhat, and without the some of those activities in there, we fall within the appropriate range. Wayne, I wonder if you might just talk us through what that analysis that you have in the tables on that page 18, the second page of your report, more generally about what those benchmarks do and don't include. Thanks.
Thank you, councillors. The difficulty comes in that different councils may do the same thing, but do them to a different standard. So even if you're talking about things like IT services, it's difficult to draw comparisons between organisations on the level of expenditure because you're not always comparing apples with apples. The report gives a couple of examples around the types of issues. I mean, some organisations have a centralised purchasing process, and so that's all included in corporate overhead. The other organisations might have a decentralised area where everybody does their own purchasing, and so therefore it's not part of a corporate overhead. So, and in looking for our organisation, as Jason indicated, the asset management is an area that's often handled within infrastructure services. As a result, there's some elements of that would be done through finance, but the majority of that would be handled elsewhere. And so without understanding how an organisation is structured and what they include in what part of their organisation, it's difficult to do direct comparisons. But, and it's an interesting exercise. The Queensland Competition Authority have done analysis of a number of different utilities, and the ones that's quoted there in the top third paragraph on that page indicated that SEQ Water, their overheads have sort of gone from 20.4 up to 24.6%. And so when we're looking at ours, at the moment we're currently 16-17, but the actual sort of sitting at 17.4% of total expenditure for materials and services and labour. But having said that, with the development of the Toto project, our overheads are currently increasing, and they'll probably end up around about 20% for a couple of years until we sort of wean ourselves off the existing software, and we can safely discontinue costs associated with those areas.
Basically within the range though, Wayne, you talk about 10 to 15%.
Yeah, so that little table there from the New South Wales schedule, effectively we come within that medium council range. Their definition medium was 351 to 1,000 staff, and then sort of across all councils, so the median was 10% up to sort of 13.5. So in that, the general acceptance was 10 to 15% would be a reasonable range. And within Queensland, the ABC group have undertaken some high-level analysis for councils that use their model for doing their overhead calculations, and they agree that sort of that 10 to 15% is probably reasonable for a general purpose council, and it changes then depending on scale for single function organisations.
So where are we on Kilda? If sort of 10 to 15 is okay, we're at 17.4. Where are we identified? Where did you identify any of those issues?
Potentially the IT costs are high, but that partly comes from the decentralised administration process with a number of different offices and some duplication between locations. So if you compare sort of an organisation with the geographical size and distribution of Central Highlands with likes of Noosa Council or Logan City or somewhere like that, you've got sort of high density, sort of small geographic footprint compared to sort of low density, large dispersal. And then your overhead costs will go up as a result of that because you've got more offices that you're maintaining. You've got some duplication between systems, between locations as well. So ICT, the asset management or the maintaining the offices will be reflected in those costs. The number of depots, the number of staff maintaining equipment at each location, all of those add up.
So I think inside there, Councillor Bell, so the 17.4, you can take off the 0.7% that relates to asset management because that's generally not included amongst the overheads, and then really our transitioning of the software and the work we're doing in IT has inflated that cost for now, but once we've got the conversion work done, we might see that plateau out, and I would have thought we'd move back towards the 15% range, probably shave another 1.5% off, so that gets us close to the 15% range. Where we sit, and as Wayne's alluded to, it's just the cost of being a distributed organisation and working in many locations that make us a little unique in that experience, I suppose.
Yeah.
So we will make it, part of our way of doing business that we benchmark this every year through our budget process now. So we'll add that to the reports that you see through our future budget processes, so that there's an ability to track that over time.
Excellent, thanks Wayne.
There's no resolution then.
No.
Just consideration.
Consideration, thank you. Jason, public record keeping.
So by way of introduction, we have Hale back at the table in his governance manager role, and with him our supervisor for information management, Vanessa Langtree. At the request of Councillor Bell for our last Leadership and Governance Committee meeting, there was an intent signal to provide some clarity to council in relation to public record keeping. This paper has been constructed around that through Aaron, Vanessa and Cale. And I might pass over to Cale to lead us through that with the assistance of Vanessa, if I can, through you, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jason. Madam Chair. Good afternoon again, everyone. Introducing Vanessa Langtree, this time Supervisor Records. Yes, in response to a question from Councillor Bell at the last committee meeting, we've provided some information. I've spoken to Councillor Bell since that meeting to ensure I captured the intent of his request. It comes in two parts. The first is in relation to record keeping. I might do it in the reverse order that it's presented in the report, but the first is about record keeping obligations. So on the second and third pages of the report outlines, I guess, the statutory responsibilities for record keeping for all public officials, including councillors, and the reasonably resolute definitions of the Public Records Act. It's very much the case nowadays that records are, with the advances in technology, it's no longer that records are simply a pen on paper. In fact, from the definition of record in the Public Records Act, includes anything on which there is writing, anything on which there are marks, figures, symbols or perforations, anything from which sounds, images or writings can be reproduced, a map, plan, drawing or photograph. It is intentionally broad, and therefore we have responsibilities as public officials that anything that we create satisfying those definitions is a public record, satisfies the definition of a public record, and therefore needs to be captured, if it involves council business, needs to be captured in our systems such that the public record can be complete and preserved. We've given a number of references in the report that might assist councillors as referral points for brushing up on public record keeping, but certainly Vanessa and Aaron and their staff are available to assist councillors at any time if you've got questions around record keeping responsibilities or the practicalities of how you might go about some of those things. And if there was no questions on that point, Madam Chair, I might move into that practicalities part of it, the sort of architecture of how systems are established to try and assist councillors with satisfying those responsibilities.
Just a question on the record keeping. So, say for instance, and this is just a test, I suppose, I'm not quite sure about my head around. Somebody sends us for a letter. The letter's also, well, not sent to the CEO, but to the mayor and councillors. Should councillors ensure that that letter is then sent to the CEO if it's addressed to the council?
Yes, Madam Chair, if it involves council business, yes, it is the councillor's responsibility to ensure that records involving council business are captured in record systems. There aren't auditable processes around those things, and I guess it is a risk judgment that each council all makes in terms of which records they offer up for capture into the systems. The obligations are fairly black and white. I guess you will get all assortments of correspondence that might mix council business with other business and the like, and it will be those judgments that councils make on each occasion, and that's where Aaron and Vanessa and staff are available to offer you assistance if you're unsure about those things. But a little bit like lots of other advice that bureaucrats will give you from time to time, it's to take a fairly conservative approach to those things. It's a bit like the if in doubt, step out type provisions. If you think it might be council business, it probably is, and it's probably safer to be captured than not.
And if an email, so the same letter was sent to the CEO, the mayor and councillors, does council then have an obligation to send it to the council, understanding that it's already gone to the CEO?
Madam Chair, if I understand Councillor Bell's question correctly, so a broadcast.
Not a deed or a deed, but I'm just sort of trying, there is a difference now, isn't there? The CEO has been produced in the conversation.
Yes, so if there is a form letter broadcast, so the same letter is addressed to the organisation and to all council orders, it is effectively the same record. And if you're satisfied that the organisation has captured that record, then I guess there's lesser a responsibility to provide the one that's addressed to each individual councillor into the system, as long as the intent of the public record is preserved, and that is that you're satisfied that the letter that you've received is the same letter that the CEO has received, then that requirement is discharged. Of course, if you go on to scribble a few notes on there or whatever that involve that council business, that alters that record, and then that would need to be captured separately to the original that arrived in the mail here in the building.
So there was a process that I had many years ago, and when we had an arrangement called Citrix, where we were able to dial into council Miles Lane or to its, and I had various files kept on the Citrix, retaining to all correspondence, everything that I received, but it's been sort of lost all that now. But is that a possible opportunity for us to do it so that, and I don't know what the practicalities are now with councils accessing the mainframe easily, and doing it so a simple system where an email with a letter or an email that might need to be recorded or whatever else could be sort of set aside in a file that might say Ag Force, or it might say local government department, or it might say you know, Central Islands Healthcare or something. So, and then that, therefore it is on the council record.
Chair, that might be one for Jason more so than myself.
The one time I had all of those kept on the council. Now it hasn't been happening for years. To worry.
Through you, Madam Chair, there are a couple of ways in which we can manage that, Councillor Bell. As we migrate to the new technology, particularly the use of what's called OneDrive accounts, which is a cloud-based storage tool, we could certainly set up each councillor with a OneDrive account, folder structures inside there. That gives you, I suppose, an ability to go back and look for that record. It also gives us an ability to sweep through and do the public record search on stuff that comes in there as and when we need to.
I think it's essential for the future, so if we can start looking at that as a design, as long as it's simple and we can just sweep that stuff into there. And as I said, going back to my first question to Carl, was that I suppose I just felt that if I got an email that wasn't addressed to the CEO, I'd send it to the CEO, most of us do. If it was the CEO was in, you know, he might not, I suppose, recognise, or who was dealing with his correspondence might not realise that it's been sent to all the councillors. Sometimes we got this letter from email or whatever. Did you get it? You know, I mean, they're the sorts of things we can just try and tie in, so that's easier. But then it's the record keeping, isn't it? That's, what do we do with it? Do we just delete it? Do we stick it in our personal file on our personal computer? What do we do with it? Should it be restored somewhere in the council the council, no, Cloud's happy with that. So I think that's really the way we need to go on that. So that's that topic, yeah. Okay.
Can I just make a comment on that? The receiving an email addressed individually, I mean, every councillor receives the same email, same letter, but they've sent them individually. So then I always think that I have to respond. So you respond to that, but if it's sent to, you respond and you also send it to the CEO. But if it's sent to all councillors and the CEO, I feel then that it's the CEO's responsibility to actually respond to the letter. Is that correct?
In essence, Madam Chair, yes.
Yeah.
So it's been broadcast to a wide group, and you're satisfied that, or you're aware that it has been broadcast to that entire group. The sender will only expect a single response, and if the CEO's been included on that. If that material is received on your council device, and that's what we're about to get into around the architecture of stuff, it will be captured in any event. So there's no requirement for action on your part, providing it's come to your council email account and therefore captured in the council server.
The other comment that we're thinking, you go on to the architecture.
Sure. So for reasons that are becoming increasingly evident, I guess there's been a couple of high-profile cases recently, that importance around separation of public records and private records is heightened by not only the Parliament's, but I guess public expectation, and the recent cases involving Senator Clinton in the US and Minister Mark Bailey in Queensland, I guess, draw fairly sharp focus to those things. The current policy arrangements allow for provision of equipment to councillors that by design makes that separation. So if you have taken publicly owned devices, phones, iPads and the like, then they are configured in such a way that all the information that is received by or sent from those devices is captured in council systems. For practical purposes, some councillors choose to not have publicly owned devices and prefer to carry a single phone rather than two phones. And they too can be configured in such a way that whilst it's seamless receipt and transmission of messages, emails particularly, they can be segregated behind the scenes, and the device can be configured in such a way that whilst your single mailbox is receiving at CHRC emails plus private emails, and they'll be presented that way to you on your screen, they are still being captured separately behind the scenes. Aaron explains to me that most devices, I think, and he's still doing some work with Councillor Bell, I believe, most devices have been configured in that way. So we're reasonably comfortable that either by the use of separate devices or configuration of a private device in such a way that separates, that is reasonably well captured for email. What's a little less clear is the use of text messaging and social media posts that are made generally from private accounts. So again, text messages on a council phone will be captured by the council device and therefore captured on the public record. Text messages sent from a private phone will be kept on the private phone on your private account. But if you're texting about council business, then that is a record as defined, and it will be up to you to make a judgment about whether that record needs to be captured or not as a public record, and if so, transmit said record in some way to the organisation to enable its capture. Similarly with social media posts, which are generally made from personal accounts, some public officials go to the trouble of establishing a separate public official or public identity account, but I'm aware that Local Government Association and others are recommending against the creation of separate accounts, simply because people want to engage with the authentic individual rather than the persona of an individual. And they recognise that there are risks in terms of public record keeping and how you do that, but the average punter doesn't necessarily make the distinction between the citizen and the elected official. So that does become a little bit complicated where social media posts are about council business and therefore are effectively public records and are made from private accounts. And we don't have an easy solution, an easy technological solution in order to capture that, although there is software that is being developed that is enabling that, and we're certainly looking into that for council orders, but we don't have that software right here and now, and therefore the obligation is still on individuals to make judgments about, is this social media post made from a personal device or from a personal account? Is this a public record, and do I have obligations to have that captured? Am I going to screenshot that and email it in? How am I going to go about that? I don't have easy answers for that, and there's, I guess, a lot of movement in social media that's stayed ahead of the parliaments and legislature, and they're struggling to catch up with, and modern day record keeping practices struggling to keep up with advances in technology in that regard when it comes to public record keeping. And the blurring of the lines between what is private business and public business. And I guess we could, I imagine there are record keeping officials in the US who are struggling to keep up with the US president at the moment.
I get no way to that already.
No.
So we have made a few suggestions on how things in its current cumbersome form might be done reasonably simply, or as simply as we can imagine, but we're not pretending that this isn't a difficult thing to do when every other citizen around the place just texts away happily or posts to their social media happily and doesn't have to think about the obligations of record keeping. Councillors transacting council business or posting council business do have those broader obligations to consider. So we've made a couple of suggestions on page 2 of the report. Screenshotting as we talked about and sending to Vanessa and staff at Records to be captured into a system. Or often, a long time ago when we did a lot more business by telephone and snail mail, often if you were dealing with business and you had a telephone conversation about a particular business transaction, it was common practice to reduce that to writing afterwards so that there was a written record of what you'd agreed on the telephone. In a similar way, you might reduce a text message or a social media post to an email on a council device. Dear so-and-so, just confirming our exchange of text messages that this is what we agreed, and then that's captured in the system without having to send it on to Records and the like. So again, still double handling, but I guess a practice that wouldn't be uncommon to people at least as old as me who used to write letters after making commitments on telephone calls, in a similar sort of way where you make it a more formal form of communication and using a device that captures that automatically without you having to send it on to someone else.
Through the chair, and so with our devices, with your iPad, your notes will be captured as well, wouldn't they?
Yes, Madam Chair, that if it's a council device, they will be captured.
Okay, great.
Book, which I take care of notes in.
I take notes.
Yes, and if there are notes in your diaries, handbooks, daybooks, there's still people who are prolific daybook users. If there's items of council business in there, then at some stage those records need to be captured publicly. Yeah.
So does that mean that Councillor Brimblecomb's going to scan every page of his notebook?
If his notebook's primarily about council business, just offer up the notebook. When it gets to the end, offer up the notebook. If there's things that are really important in there and topical and something that he thinks that there might be a sort of, impending decisions or actions to be made, make the organisation aware that I scribbled a few things on my notebook today about matter X.
Yeah.
And I need the organisation to be aware that this was the content of the discussion that I had, and here's a copy of my notes. But I imagine that would be the exception rather than the rule.
So this, Jason, this report, to get it to all councillors. So,
So the agendas are available to all councillors, Madam Chair.
and I think it's
Probably
be
take
worth,
a read if we can highlight that.
yeah, be worth, highlighting it to all councillors for those that aren't with us today.
So through you, Madam Chair, I'll have the governance manager to send it separately to all councillors with an offer to step them through it either with himself or Vanessa, as may be needed around the level of detail underneath that.
So just in regards to correspondence, council correspondence, I just want to go a bit further now. An email is majority, SMS is minority, but it's getting bigger. But does council provide to staff a template for somebody that sends in a letter of request? So I've got a bumpy road or I've got a pothole. And this email is now gone to all councillors and the CEO. At the moment, I think some of us tend to just hold back and not do anything and wait for the CEO to respond. Whereas I think good practice might say, there should be a little email go out saying this correspondence is going to the CEO. You will get in so many days, or you'll in a period, you'll get a response from the CEO. And I think does that happen with staff? Now, if I get an email and I'm in the staff area, is there a template email that goes out that says, got your email, we're dealing with it? And then there's another one that sort of says, we've gone a bit further and we've fixed it, or whatever. So I'm just wondering whether or not there's some of those things that can be done, particularly now I'm getting into confusion that when I go through my emails now, in some places I've got 3 or 4 signatures. One might apply to a health thing, one might apply to council, one might apply to a personal email, but that signature is then usually applied. But I'm just wondering if not under our, and Michelle might know a little bit more about our communications protocol and the way in which we engage with ratepayers or residents. Is there a stock standard response that goes out to any email or any request to a council staff or CEO or member?
Madam Chair, I'll give a typical bureaucrat's response. The answer is yes and no. If emails are directed to the general council inquiries account, the answer is yes. They get a standard acknowledgement that explains that emails will be responded to in the terms of the commitments that are made in the customer service charter. 500 bodies at the council was probably about 300 email accounts. That's not universal practice. And in the situation that you illustrated about an email broadcast to all councillors and CEO, that's not the current practice unless one of those individuals initiates that. Councillors should be able to rely on the organisation taking the lead in that regard though, and your suggestion that councillors generally step back and allow the organisation to do that, I would suggest is the best practice. I am familiar with the confusion that can be created when 8 or 9 people receive the same email, all feel compelled to acknowledge receipt and the fact that it's going to be referred to someone else. And if you're the original transmitter of that email and all of a sudden you've got 9 acknowledgements and one sent it to someone else and one sent it to a different person, you just create confusion for all involved. It is an imperfect system and I'm not aware of the perfect protocol for all of those things, but certainly where you see clearly that the organisation's been included on that list, My suggestion to you would be allow the organisation to respond in line with its customer service charter.
Through you, Madam Chair, to add to what Carl said, it is part of the work that we're doing in the customer service space that Michelle is leading, often around those that will come in with multiple requests. So it might have something about a dog or a rubbish bin in a road and a park, for instance. It's the multiple requests in one email that certainly tends to not be well handled by the organisation through not so much the ad hoc requests, but our ability to deal with everything all at the same time and provide a coordinated response. So it's an area for improvement. I agree with what Carl said, and it's in that piece of work that Michelle is driving through the organisation, and hopefully we can leverage some of the functionality inside our new technology to allow the system to support that better than it does now.
There's a place that I get continual feedback from ratepayers that they don't hear from us.
Yeah.
Sent an email 3 months ago to so-and-so, never heard of him. It might be that person's not there anymore or something else has happened. But, in lots of places you send an email as a generic sent back to you, got your email, we're dealing with it. I know Deputy Mayor, you showed a very good example of Rocky City with a complaint, through the complaint system, and I think that's the one that works well here. But not necessarily just general business or council. So it's just something that we can tidy up. And as I said, in the days gone by, I've sort of developed a generic response, just so we've got your email and sent to the appropriate people, and we'll be dealt with. If you haven't heard from it, listen, whatever our customer service charter says, 48 hours, 27, 72 hours, whatever. Well, please get back to me. But that's about, basically, I just didn't know whether the council should have our own little one, because we are outside the operational system council lots of time. And, it doesn't hurt if we duplicate those things for us, so that we can still transmit them in an appropriate way, and not to say, look, no, you're a developer and you're having trouble, why don't we have a cup of coffee? That would not go well with CMC. So I'm just saying that it's probably better if we've got some generics just to say this is what you should do. Sure.
Look, we know there's room for improvement there, Councillor Bell. Listen to what you said and try and build that into the systems and processes.
Yeah, it's all doable, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's all about a process and progress.
The important thing is getting a system around it. Traditionally, local government have relied on people and not systems to do these things, and so we need to systematise it, for want of a better word. So it plugs into a system and then we get consistent and repeatable outcomes as an organisation.
Madam Chair, as Jason explains, there's some work going on, some longer lead work that's going on. As a very short step in response to Councillor Bell's question, Vanessa will send out to councillors this afternoon just the wording of the standard acknowledgement that is used. It's automated in that case, but councillors are welcome to use it, and there will be a consistent approach.
That'd be great. That's a good step forward. Thank you.
That's for that one.
That's for that one. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Carl doesn't need to leave.
I doesn't need to leave. We go straight on to departmental updates.
There are a couple that I'll ask Carl to talk to around information that's come from the Crime and Corruption Commission, just to briefly touch on those dot points, and also an update around the values merchandise between maybe Andrea can add some value to that one.
Thanks, Judge. Madam Chair, there's a variety of publications that come from the Crime and Corruption Commission, and indeed all the integrity agencies, to assist us with our fraud and corruption prevention activities. Some of the most recent from the Crime and Corruption Commission that were considered at the last meeting of the Audit Committee a couple of weeks ago involved recommendations around creation of separate conflict of interest policy outside of codes of conduct. So a reasonably universal inclusion in codes of conduct is references to conflicts of interest. The CCC has concluded, given recent goings on in the local government sector, that that's perhaps not strong enough and that it requires standalone policy. So those recommendations have been made, and part of that policy suite that will come to you will be consideration of separate conflicts of interest, policy development. The CCC has also, sorry,
Up or down?
the one just down a bit. Sherry, thanks. So there is now a best practice guide that's come out in March, and the CCC had been working on this prior to some of the higher profile incidents involving some of the southern councils in recent times. A best practice guide around how to tackle fraud and corruption work. Our councillors would be aware the Central Highlands Council, independent of that exercise, has committed considerable resources to fraud and prevention and corruption over the last couple of years. So pleasingly, a lot of the work that's recommended by the CCC is on foot already, but we're certainly reconciling that work against the recommendations around the best practice guide to ensure that every effort is being made as ratepayers and citizens would expect, that a public agency like Central Highlands Council is taking all the steps to minimise and prevent fraud and corruption wherever possible.
In relation to the next point, Madam Chair, around the values merchandise, I think behind us there, Andrea, we have one of the foldouts.
Yes, that's just one of the banners. There's a couple more banners coming. There's a lot of debate around the design for the other banners, and we're waiting a little bit to see what happens with the refurbishment out here and where we might put them, and then we were talking about whether they should be banners or whether we might have posters, and then how we were going to put them in the outer offices because they don't have a lot of space for banners, so we're looking at some other treatments for that. There's a couple of banners coming, and also some more merchandise that we're using for the conference at the end of the week, so a big media backdrop as well, but that's what we use. And then we've got these 4 items that are promoting the council values. I think they're on the table there. There's a pad, a mouse pad, a thinking bottle, and they will be distributed to staff. If the toolbox talks, we're going to be able to do that. There's not one of each for everybody, so it's a bit of a pick what you like. Really, it's not much point getting a truck driver a mouse pad. And I've just got here, they cost about $3,000 so far for those items.
So through you, Madam Chair, back to you, Councillor Bell, we have embedded it into our toolbox talk regime. I know you've asked a few times now how the value is being exercised and lived in the organisation. We do make it our point each time we stand up from the management perspective to at least touch on one of those values so that people, over time will be able to quote those values verbatim and understand that building a values-based culture inside our organisation will take some time. Our continuous reference to it and the collateral that's been produced there just enables the reinforcement of learning in through and to everybody in our organisation. So we are working on it. We have been doing it for some time now. It's just continuing to do that so that it becomes lived experience by the employees. The other one there, Madam Chair, is just the update for the elected member update on the Local Government Association of Queensland. I understand most members were there and there's just some notes taken by the CEO on the day, taken as read along with the attachments that were included at that time.
That was excellent.
It was a good one, wasn't it?
That was the best one I've ever produced. I mean, it was really, really good. Hit on all the points and well presented. It's the best one I've ever been to, and I've been to bloody everyone. So.
Yeah, good. And Scott's notes were very good. Obviously, some of us weren't there.
Yep.
It sounded like the big things
So that's a general business.
General business. Okay, general business. I have. We can bring to if maybe through
I'd like to see some, just a review of advisory groups to council and the governance of. If it's possible, please bring it back to this committee at some stage. Thank you.
Take that on notice, Madam Chair, and try to report back
Thank
to
you.
the next one.
Yes. So, no more general business, we'll move into closed session. I'll move. Somebody, thanks, Councillor Nixon, second, Councillor McCann. There's not much. I'll just do this. You get some steps. Here.
We've got that discussion, okay.